Hello X-Files fans, welcome. I am bored now. Welcome to my season roundup of the X-Files Season 1. On this video I will be talking about my top 5 and bottom 5 episodes of the first season. I'll also be doing just a general sort of roundup of my thoughts on the season overall and some of the highs and lows. I'll be talking about my favourite character of the season, my favourite villain slash monster. He is very up and down in quality, I have to say. It's fair to say the first season, the X-Files was still coming into its own with a lot of the mythology it was developing, obviously some of the big themes and arcs, and some of the mythology didn't really come into play until later in this season. And my Flask, which was a really standout season finale and did a great job in setting up a lot of the themes and mythology that we're going to be seeing over the next few seasons. So the final episode of the season does feel like a real turning point, and there definitely are standout episodes along the way. I'll talk about them in a moment, probably when I get to my lists, but there's also a lot of real sort of clunkers, and there's definitely a lot of in-between episodes as well, a lot of dead weight, a lot of sort of middle of the road episodes that does date the show, but at the same time I think gives it a certain charm as well. I think there's just something very watchable about the X-Files, even bad episodes, although there are one or two episodes in this season which are sort of unredeemable, I think. And I guess if I'm being honest, because I'm an X-Files fan, I would rewatch them, but that's maybe the only reason. I think then ultimately they're not that sort of watchable, and characters go on the journey this season and they end up in a much stronger place. The cigarette smoking man, and you've got Skinner introduced near the end of the season, so a lot of exciting stuff to come. When it comes to season 2, about 6 out of 10. Maybe 6.5 if I'm being generous, but it's sort of in that ballpark really. I think because there's a few really bad episodes that would likely be on kind of worst episodes of all time list, and there's quite a lot of episodes that are middle of the road, which you think have a good premise but don't quite follow through on it. So the balance is a bit, sort of iffy, but it's at least strong enough to say 6.5, I would say. It sort of helps then there's better on the way. I actually just mentioned the pilot here because that doesn't quite make the cut for my favourite, like my top 5 episodes of the season. It's close, it's certainly up there, because rewatching that, I think that stands out as maybe one of the best TV pilots ever, and that's saying something considering it's back in '93. I think it's a really shining example of how to do a pilot where you set everything up, what you can expect from the show, but at the same time there's still a sense of mystery and intrigue at the end. It definitely doesn't give too much away, and a decent enough case as well involved in it. So the pilot is a standout episode for sure, which doesn't quite make the cut for my top 5. But speaking of my lists, I'll start with the negative stuff, and I'll start with the bottom 5, and in at number 5.
Why, you should die like an animal, you son of a bitch!
Yes, it's Young at Heart, where Mulder acts like a complete and utter madman, and you get this shady-looking film noir-ish type villain who basically uses animal DNA to make himself not older but younger, so he ages in reverse and is able to carry on this ridiculous killing spree as a result. Now some people find this B-movie plot kind of charming and so inventive, then it's actually entertaining. Like the fact that he's got a hand which is made out of like I can't even remember which animal it is now, but one of the like chimpanzee DNA or something. Some people find that so charming and quirky and B-movie. I just find it absolutely ridiculous. The villain himself is actually decent, but we get very little of him. And boy, is there some cheesy and clunky dialogue in the episode. There's like these phone call conversation where he's basically messing with Mulder's head, and it's done all in like silhouettes and shadows, and it just looks so dated and ridiculous, and the plot just goes nowhere. There's one or two nice scenes in the episode. It's not totally without merit. We also get a really over the top and kind of 80s style action scene at the end at like this opera sort of recital where they're basically planning on setting the villain up, which doesn't do much for me, I have to say, beyond how silly it is. But that's Young at Heart, my number 5. And my number 4 least favourite episode of the season is Miracle Man, where we get a pretty stereotypical depiction of a small town religious plot where basically this young man can mysteriously heal, or appears to heal, people who are on the verge of dying, but yet it's all part of this carnival type show where they're making money off it, and Mulder and Scully come in to investigate. I think it just commits the worst sin of just being very bland and forgettable. It's a really middle of the road episode. There's not a lot to like the supporting characters or not that much intrigue to it overall, although you are sort of interested to see where it's going overall, but it's just really boring. Whereas with an episode like Jersey Devil, which is much maligned, you can say it's many things, but boring isn't one of them. The other big thing with the episode is that they just hammer home the stuff with Mulder's sister so badly. They use it as like an extra like support sort of theme where they just try and use it to crank up the tension or crank up intrigue. And it's an interesting plot and sub theme, obviously, what happened with his sister and his whole motivation for the X-Files. But here it's just misused and comes off as really cheap. So Miracle Man, to me, a real dud. I found it boring. In at number 3 is Gender Bender. Quite the title, sadly not the most remarkable episode. It's one of these episodes that were trying to draw on quite a meaty sort of theme for the era, so kind of ahead of its time in trying to deal with some sort of date rape types storyline, but unfortunately it just doesn't have the subtlety in the writing to like fully explore it, and it ends up becoming a very bland middle of the road episode. I think that's a running theme with season 1, is that a lot of the episodes that don't quite hit the mark, I can't quite say they're terrible, but they just come off as very bland with very little interest outside of one or two good Mulder and Scully scenes, one or two good like moments of dialogue. This is another one where they're dealing with a certain like sort of set or subculture, and in this case they're meant to be like the Amish, these characters with their particular beliefs and sort of form of religion. And again, the episode maybe doesn't quite explore them as interestingly as it could. The villains are drawn up in a very, murky kind of stereotypical type way. The actor's not really given a lot to do. There's a couple of nice, like, visual moments that are actually quite tense and interesting, so I'll give the episode that. I think its worst sin is that maybe it sort of sells Scully out, because there's a moment in the episode quite late on where she becomes quite sort of naive and vulnerable to one of the particular characters, and I guess the episode didn't do enough for me to make me sort of believe in that. Don't get me wrong, there's certainly moments throughout the X-Files where you'll have a storyline where Scully's kind of taken in by a character, and I think those episodes handle it better. Here, I just didn't think the episode earned it, and it made me sort of hate the episode more. So that's Gender Bender. In at number 2 is Ghost in the Machine, and for fans of Buffy, it sort of feels like the I, Robot You Jane of the X-Files first season, except the more I watch I, Robot You Jane, the more entertaining I actually find it. The more I watch this, the more it puts me to sleep. The AR stuff is completely dull. The mechanical voice of the computer is just silly. The way they try to make it so human, it's just ridiculous. The plot is snooze inflecting. Mulder and Scully are given very little to do. There's no real suspense to the mystery. And to top it all off, one of the protagonists of the episode, this sort of hippie scientist genius named Brad, is just so shallow, and so his whole argument for his motivations are so unconvincing. You don't engage with this guy at all, especially when you see how fancy his house is. Yeah, that's a guy you want to root for. He's really doing it for humanity. And to top it all off, Deep Throat's wasted in a cameo where he just explains that the government are interested in the technology for Brad's brain, for God's sake, which always reminds me of this.
Check out the big brain on Brad. You're a smart motherfucker, that's right.
Well said, Samuel, which brings me on to Space, my number one choice. Not only my least favourite episode of this season, but it may be my least favourite episode of the X-Files ever. I'll have to see when I get to some other stinkers down the line, but yeah, boy does this suck. It's really, really dull. You've got the cardboard looking space NASA sets they come up which look so cheap. The way they cut around the aircraft, the fact that the whole space mission and the drama around it, the force drama is not very interesting to watch. You've got really lame characters and force drama with them. Mulder and Scully are left sort of twiddling their thumbs for a lot of the episode. And at the end of the day, you've got Mulder fanboying, and then you've got the terrible 90s effect. And the terrible idea just to have this scene where this lead of the mission has this weird ghost-looking entity imposed onto his face. The whole thing just looks so ridiculous, and it's such a boring episode. So that's Space, my number one least favourite episode of the first season. It's an absolute clunker. Sad thing is I would probably watch it again just because I'm the nerd. But Space, it sucks balls, folks. It really does. That's my number one. Which moves me into my top 5 personal favourite episodes of the first season. And at number 5, it's EBE, or the Big Deep Throat episode, in other words. And this one really starts to get into the mythology of the UFO subject when it comes to the X-Files, so it really starts building some of the themes we're going to see in the coming seasons, and it's the biggest and most crucial episode up to this point for the Deep Throat character, who really comes into his own. His like father-son type relationship with Mulder sort of comes into the spotlight, as well as the question of can he really be trusted. And there's some brilliant scenes with Mulder and Scully debating this, some brilliant scenes with Mulder and Deep Throat, and it's a really well written episode in that sense. There's plenty of suspense and mystery. It also gives you the feel of like the classic sort of paranoid conspiracy theory political sort of side to the X-Files, which I know may be a turn off to some fans, but it's some of the best stuff of the show in my opinion. And it's also the introduction of the Lone Gunmen, who make a really promising debut. So a really strong episode, some good twists and turns as well. That's EBE. And for my number 4 pick, all the way back to the 3rd episode of the season, obviously when the show is still establishing itself, and the first proper Monster of the Week episode of The X-Files. It is, of course, Squeeze, guest starring Doug Hutchinson, a Monster of the Week so chill and so brilliant, he even got his sequel, Tombs, later in the season. Not as good, but a solid sequel anyway. And this is a really classic example of what the early X-Files did. It's really creepy, really disturbing. There's some fun sort of practical effects. There's a good mystery surrounding the monster. Very convincing performance by Doug Hutchinson, who was really unknown at the time, but he sort of has that sort of twisted babyface like persona where there is darkness lurking behind the eyes, but you can see why he would like take people in. But he's very cold and emotionless, and also you have that intriguing plot with Scully and her ex-partner, and kind of this idea of path and if she can trust Mulder and if the X-Files is for her. And it's one of those like sort of first big turning points where she sees her old partner for what he really is, and it's like, screw you, pal, I'm sticking with Fox. And so really, really strong for early episode. That is Squeeze. In at number 3 on my top list for the first season, it's the episode I reviewed just recently. It is the season finale. It is the Anna Minor Flask. And this is when the show really starts properly for me. It's one of the big mythology episodes. It really starts setting up a lot of the backstory, a lot of the mythology, and the main arc for the truth is out there, UFO style things. The theories that we're going to see developed over the last few seasons. And I think just as a bit of writing from Chris Carter, the show's creator, I think it is one of his best scripts. The episode has just about everything. There's great character interactions, there's meaty themes, there's unpredictability. Again, it has that sort of tense paranoia, sort of political subtext to it. Great interactions with Mulder and Scully. Iconic images, some of the most iconic images of the show. And yeah, I mean, just the brilliant sort of finale of the episode where Scully actually has to work with Deep Throat to save Mulder. Deep Throat, one of the people she's always been cynical of. So that's some great writing in itself. Has a really good action scene that opens the episode, and it really, I mean, if you were a bit patchy on the first season, this is sort of the season finale to get you hooked in. Obviously has the brilliant kind of cliffhanger at the end of the episode as well. So very dramatic, very unpredictable, and again sells you on the Deep Throat character, because actually there's just as much mystery around him by his exit from the show than there had been before. So he even leaves some unanswered questions, which I kind of love. But that's the Anna Minor Flask in at number 3. Into the top 2, and I think for those of you who's been following my reviews, it's quite predictable what the top 2 episodes are going to be. It's just a case of which order, and you'll see from the picture, my number 2 pick is Ice. So it's the episode which is essentially like a bottle episode. It's mostly contained to the one location, and the tension and the drama which comes out of that. It is the episode which is really inspired by the film The Thing, the John Carpenter thing, and does a brilliant job of like making an X-Files case out of it. And it's definitely one of the standout episodes of this season, probably of any season really. I think they get a lot of tension out of it. I think the intrigue around the whole the virus and the sort of primate sort of plot, and the kind of I'm looking for the right word, but the parasite, that's the word I was looking for. It's like really well done. A great drama with Mulder and Scully, and also for the budget, I think it actually looks really good. I mean, they really make a lot out of very little money that they would have had to have worked on the episode. So you really believe that they are in like this very like sort of isolated, contained, frosty sort of like Arctic setting, and they are in the middle of nowhere. and potentially could get trapped there and never make it out alive, which obviously gets heightened with when the thing starts developing. Again, that sense of paranoia and dread and unpredictability, mystery that the X-Files does so well. But I think the other thing that elevates it is the quality of the supporting cast, and that, you know, people like Xander Berkeley, Felicity Hoffman, you've got Kenny Banner out of Seinfeld, Jeff Kolber, who's another like underrated character actor, because a lot of times, especially in the early X-Files, you obviously rely a lot on the stuff with Mulder and Scully, and sometimes the standard of the supporting cast, or at least their characters, isn't that good. But this is one of those standout early episodes where the supporting cast really add another sort of layer to it, because they're really well cast. And I also like the sense that they all feel different from each other, and there's almost like this intriguing sort of like subplot with the Xander Berkeley and Felicity Hoffman character, where they're sort of like the mirror of Mulder and Scully, as in that they've worked together now for a while and they know each other very well. I mean, you probably get the sense that they've been working together longer than Mulder and Scully have, so they have this real rapport. And I just like this idea that the episode introduces almost another version of Mulder and Scully, and they get to play off them. So, really, really strong episode. It holds up very well. It's one of those season 1 episodes that sort of stands the test of time, and I think is going to be pretty high up on my list when I finish the show. That is Ice. Somewhere beyond the sea, somewhere waiting for me. Oh, sorry, lost myself there. Yes, it's Beyond the Sea, my number one. Of course it is. The one starring Brad DeWolf in a legendary cameo role as the terrifying, freaky Luther Boggs, a former case of Mulder, which Mulder sort of at first believes has a part to play in this case. But the unique twist in this episode, which is partly inspired by Silence of the Lambs, is that it's actually Scully who has the belief. This is the introduction to her becoming a believer, and it's sort of through her faith partly, but also through a very dramatic event in her life which happens at the start of the episode, and that is losing her father, which comes to her in a vision one night, and then it turns out he is in fact dead. And I just love the fact that this is a sort of a dig into Scully's like family history and her relationship with her parents, but particularly her father, and how that makes the episode very relatable for a lot of people, very emotional. And I also enjoyed the balls of the show, really, the fact that this is the first time we've met Scully's father, and then boom, he kind of gets killed off, and just the drama that leads to it, and how it's sort of, you question her judgment really as a result. You know, is she thinking with a clear mind, all the rest of it. So she actually becomes the believer, Mulder becomes the cynic, and it leads to some fantastic drama. Then you have Boggs, and obviously Derif's performance as him, which is just one of the most terrifying and creepy villains ever in the X-Files, but also the way he makes him just about human enough where you engage with him, or you're at least interested in him. And I think there's enough suspense, enough doubt that at times you sort of do believe that this guy could be legit, or then there is at least a certain humanity in him. It's one of the great support performances of the X-Files, of 90s TV. I mean, I'll go as far as to say that, maybe TV in general. And I know some feel it might be Brad DeWitt's best ever performance, which is saying a lot, but I probably couldn't argue with that. But it's such a complex, emotional episode. I love the way they use that that song Beyond the Sea, which obviously has this sort of like inner meaning, I think, to do with death and mortality, but obviously it's a very kind of nice and upbeat song as well. So it does that classic sort of horror thing of taking a song like that and sort of turning it on its head, for a different sort of use. But it's a wonderfully grueling episode, and obviously changes the game and the stakes for the series, and really explores a different side of the Scully character. And this is the start of her, on a slightly different path, but also bringing into focus her relationship and her bond with Mulder even more, and the attachment they're going to have moving forward from now. But it's very tense, very well shot, very stylish, some great visual set pieces, some plenty of intrigue in the plot and the mystery. It's very well sort of plotted out. And I mean, there is something where the Scully centric episode, for many, including myself, do tend to be better and more satisfying than the more Mulder focused episodes. And it's none more demonstrated than in this. Obviously, Gillian Anderson, amazing actress. This was very early in her career, and she knocks it out of the park, I should say. Even at this early stage in her career, she's just so impressive in a really heavy hitting sort of role. And obviously, she's gone on to great things since the X-Files as well. But yeah, I think as a calling card for the Scully character, this is one of the big episodes and one of the very best, not just of season one, but the whole series. So that is Beyond the Sea, my number one for season one. If you agree with my top five, let me know. If you disagree, what would be your personal top five of the series? And also, if you want to, there's plenty of ups and downs in the first series, so let me know your bottom five as well if you wish. Just a couple of other things in terms of characters. I mean, generally it's always going to be Mulder and Scully Mulder or Scully when it comes to character of the season. Obviously, as we move on, there will be other characters that emerge as major forces, but yeah, I'll go with Scully for character of the season. When it comes to, underrated character, I would say something like Max Fennick. He was really impressive in his debut, and I know he's going to pop up again in another episode. Monster of the season or villain, it's really between Toombs and Boggs. It's very close. I mean, maybe I'd give the edge to Boggs just because Brad DeWitt's performance is so good. I think it's one of the best performances you'll see on TV, really. I think it is that good. And Doug Hutchinson is good, but it's not quite. I mean, what he's given isn't quite the level than DeWitt is given. But also, it's worth saying Toombs, I think, just as a classic example of what a creepy X-Files monster of the week is, that's a standout role as well. I think it's fair to say that they're very different characters. So, but I'll give the edge to Boggs, I think, because of the riff, and also it's fun to look at some of the best lines of the season. So dialogue. I mean, for my favourite, maybe I'll go with the cut the Obi-Wan Kenobi crap from Mulder, which he says to Deep Throat in the finale of the season. I also really like very early on in Deep Throat him saying, this case has a distinct smell, a very paranormal bouquet about it. Just something like that. That's just such a great line which jumps out at you, and you can sort of believe someone with the sort of like class and the sort of, I don't know, it just somehow fits Mulder. But it's a brilliant line that always stands out to me. And a lot of the best dialogue does come through Mulder, actually. The sort of the deadpan delivery and like the sarcasm. But yeah, some standout lines. I mean, that's something I'll definitely do in future seasons. I'll look at some of the best dialogue, but those two sort of stand out. And there's some great ones in some of the big arc episodes. I actually really like the final line of Ice from Mulder, the one about beneath the earth, buried in the snow. I can't quite remember how far into the snow he says, but yeah, I do like that line. I actually really like, just as a goofy throwaway comedy line, the one where the homeless guy asks Mulder about does the hotel room have HBO in Jersey Devil. So that's some. So if you have some fun lines from season 1, then let me know some of your favourites. I'm sure there's loads I've forgotten. But that's the roundup video for season 1. Thanks for listening. Let me know your personal favourites, least favourite episodes in the comments below. Also some of the favourite, obviously not just the main characters, but supporting characters' favourite monsters, and some fun dialogue. And I'll be back soon with my first review of season 2. Like and subscribe as always. It's really important to like the video because it sort of gets it out to as many people as possible. You also share it on your social media feeds. That'll be really helpful. And if you want notification of when I go live, even with a live stream or a new video goes up, then just smash that damn bell on YouTube, because it'll let you know, trust me. So thanks for listening, and I'll be back soon. Goodbye.